all now that we're back on 3 time zones in Australia. And I will hand over to Joe Abbey, one of our tag chairs.
Joe's gone on hold. I'll take it for this.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah.
So Pairing Skills
Organisation.
Yeah, so Pairing Skills Organisation acknowledges traditional custodians and countries throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community, pay respect to the elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people today.
Thank you, Peter. And Joe was going to run through this, but I'm happy to take that.
Oh, okay.
Or you want to take that?
So
you go, mate.
Yeah, this agenda for today, we'll go through each of the slides. There will be a fair open to the floor later on for discussions about the UET and UEP packages. For those that haven't been in this meeting before, Peter Woods from Sydney Trains, been involved with this for 23 odd years. We'll go through updates on the full UEE review training project progress. The very remote training package will have an update of where that's at. They've been doing some work and meetings in around that. Project submissions, matters for discussion, and as I said, the open to the floor and question and answer session at the end. There will be plenty of time in around that.
Thanks, Peter. So just want to give some updates, and Joe Abbey, who is our other co-chair, is having some tech issues, so hopefully she can get online for our discussions as we go through, particularly around the remote and very remote, which she's involved in, and then the open to the floor. But just wanted to give an update, and we know this group is UET and UEP, but we also know the RTOs in the room, and even the industry people in the room would know there's quite a few units from the UEE training package that are core in UET qualifications. So just wanted to give a bit of a brief update, but we're not going to bombard you with UEE information. But I guess the really relevant stuff for this group is those UEE and mostly the CD units as they're coded that are imported into various UET qualifications. So we have been working with, so we've got, because of the scope of the UEE training package, we've got a technical committee set up, which is required by the training package organising framework, but we've also got 10 different SME groups across. So for instance, instrumentation, there's a group specifically working on instrumentation and control units, refrigeration, air conditioning units, etc., electronics. But even across those SME groups, those CD units are common. So we've been working on those. We started work on those initially and have got quite a few drafts of those that will be shared out wider very shortly, some of those drafts. And some of those are the ones that get imported into the UET training package. So like the WHS unit, the DC unit, which a bit of an update on the DC unit at the moment. There's about 5 versions of that where you've got a separate single path unit and a multi-path, and then you've got one that's combined, and then you've got an ELV one. We've actually brought that back into one overarching DC principles, electrical principles in DC circuits unit, and has had good response from those SME groups. So that'll be shared more broadly shortly. There's just some internal quality and assurance that needs to go before we release to the broader population. And just around that, with our goals on this project and any future projects, which we'll talk about submissions later on through this meeting, some submissions we've just put into the department for future projects. We're really aiming for no surprises, so clear communication throughout all of the units, all of the project. So that's around getting that, by the TPOF, that training package organising framework. There needs to be a defined public and government consultation process with all training products available at the end of the projects. But what we're aiming to do through the UEE and in future projects is get some drafts out once they've sort of been through that SME and technical committee review, out into the general population for review. So when we get to the end, that last condensed official consultation stage, there's not any going to be any surprises. People are aware of the what's been written and the style it's been written in, which very much we're trying to align the style right across the package, which at the moment there's quite a lot of inconsistencies across the UEE training package, and you'd probably agree even with the UET and UEP with the way qualifications and units of competency have been written. So really trying to get some consistent approaches in there, wording in there, get them to be usable for the more usable for the end users, being the training providers and also the students who get forgotten along in the process sometimes, that it's the students are the very end user of the project, of the products. So trying to make the language concise without losing the technical content is really our aim. But lots of communication along the way with the relevant stakeholders, making sure that everyone is aware. Might just flick to the next slide, Rach. So yeah, if you did want to have a look at that full training product review, what's on the website is available through that QR code there, or if you just go to our website and look up projects, you'll find it. So some of the key updates there: duplicated qualifications. So where there's multiple qualifications at the same level that have lots of common core units, we're trying to bring them into a single qualification with potentially some specialisations in the electives, depending on the units required or the certain specialisations required. So an example of that is in electronics communication space, there is multiple Cert 2 units that specialise in things like antennas and computers, etc. We're looking at consolidating that into a single Cert 2 of electronics and communications, and then having various specialisation streams built into the electives. So that's something when we get to opening up conversation in the UET UEP space later, that's worth considering in that area too, where there's some very similar core units across qualifications, but we'll save that conversation for then. Just on this UET UEE full review, has anyone got any questions at this stage on that, or happy to move on?
Just one break, because I did go to that first one, that not the working groups, but that the first of the feedback sessions. What was that group called that you've had one of? Because I found that really good.
Yep. So that's one of those things about the no surprises at the end. Thanks for the reminder, Pete. So we are running town halls for those in place of, we used to do a UEE or a couple of UEE tags, but because of the demand on the SMEs and the tech committee through that project, that a lot of those people are attending that. We're running town hall sessions every couple of months for this project, and it's basically an update of where we're at, a bit of a look at some of the stuff that's been developed, the potential around consolidating those quals into, has been discussed at the last town hall. So yeah, it's really an update to the broader broader stakeholders of where that project's at. We're also having regular bi-monthly meetings with the different jurisdictions for regulators and licensing, and also around the government and state training authorities, so the senior responsible officers and state training authorities. So again, with the aim of not getting to the end of the project and all this stuff is the first time that people have seen that, and making them aware of the approach and how we're going about developing those drafts. So yeah, thanks for that call out, Peter. Anything else before we move on to the remote, very remote in the UEE space? Okay, so we'll move on to that next one, Rachel. So we have a current project, remote and very remote training package project. And so the UET qual is in the Cert 3, and there's actually a UEE qualification that's actually had no enrolments for quite a while for Cert 2 in remote area power supply maintenance. And through that group, we've basically settled on that qualification, when it gets updated, will turn into a UET qualification. So it can be a genuine pathway into the UET Cert 3 in very remote communities, or it can be a pathway into other UET Cert 3s that aren't, because the very remote communities is very lockdown specified as to who does the training in those areas. So the review aims to ensure the qualifications remain relevant, accessible, and effective for workforce development in remote and very remote communities. So it's really about our communities in Australia that are difficult to get to, and make sure we're addressing their issues that they have around having a reliable power supply and getting training happening on the ground in those communities. Michael?
Yeah, thanks, Brett. Just on that one, I mean, that's only going to be applicable or allowable in the relevant jurisdictions, I assume.
That's right. They're designated areas. Yeah.
Yeah, so that the Cert 3 very remote, I think there's only 50 designated as very remote communities. So it would only...
There'll be none in Queensland that'll be able to access that for any work outcomes. While they may be designated, they won't be able to access it and do work.
Yeah, and that
Yeah,
we'll certainly be having some conversations with you, Michael, as a regulator up there around that. But there's certainly some interest from Queensland, the members on the tech committee for the Cert 2, because at the moment, the cohorts in those remote communities, they're using the Cert 2 electro technology, and it's sort of not really relevant for what they're wanting them to be trained in. So
that was my next question with the Cert 2. Is that the one linked to the TAFE Centre of Excellence for batteries, the clean energy batteries?
No.
The separate one again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
No, this will be a national. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Joe Abbey, our co-chair, is part of our tech committee for this project. So did you want to?
So we're sort of well down the path, aren't we? We've had 4, I think, meetings, and we've got a couple of enterprises obviously participating, a couple of RTOs, and I think the move towards using the Cert 2 as a true pathway into the UET, like that's looking like a really good outcome. Yeah, so, and I think we're still just talking through, you know, the things like water generation. What are those units that sort of build out the well, I can't remember how we're going on our timeline, Brett.
Pretty good. So this one, because of both those quals, even the Cert 2 moving into a UET qual, but certainly that Cert 3 qual will have imported UEE units. So with regards to the timeline, it's going to have to run in conjunction with that UEE project, because we don't want to, we wouldn't want to be, our initial application had it finishing a bit earlier, and then we realised that, you know, we don't want to be putting out a new UET Cert 3 in very remote communities with, say, the DC unit from UEE in it, which is an old version that's about to be superseded. The qual gets released, and then 6 months later, it's got superseded product in it. So we want to, it'll be released after the UEE or in conjunction with the UEE. So traveling pretty well on the timeline there. We're sort of just starting to get into unit development. We've started on the Cert 3 qual, and we've basically locked down the qualification with the tech committee. Something that's probably of interest to this group is around the disassembly unit that's currently used in the UET qualification, so CD19 for those who know codes.
Yeah.
we've talked with the tech committee and, you know, about developing a, and we've got a meeting next Monday and we'll be sort of canvassing this more there, but it was agreed at the last meeting that we look at developing an actual UET unit around hand and power tools and assembly, disassembly, etc., that could be used in this qualification, but then in future revisions of the UET, so the overhead, the underground, rather than importing that UEE unit, which is some of it's relevant, some of it's not to the ESI industry, to ESI. So developing their own unit for electricity supply industry in the UET package that could then form a core unit that's actually, you know, around the tools, etc., that's used in the industry by those line workers and associated. Tom?
Thanks, mate. Just wanted to ask if that was a unit you were looking at to try and relate back to UET, whether the drawings and diagrams unit could potentially be one that you'd look at also, just with the heavy criteria around AS 3000.
Yeah. So as in that UEE project, Tom, we have actually looked at that unit, and we've developed one which we did share with this group, and they were pretty happy with. So it's still UEE, but it's very more broad based. So we're looking at in the electrician qual, keeping all that stuff that's relevant to electrician, but for a broader use, because it's used in electronics and it's used in instrumentation, etc. We've removed a lot of that out. So we've got a draft of that will probably be shared out publicly fairly shortly, of a more generic drawings, diagrams and specifications type unit. And this tech committee looked at that unit recently and found it a lot more fit for purpose for their quals. So yeah, that's definitely been, because that unit, as you know, talks about construction sites and underground consumer mains, etc. It's really specific to electrical. So we have made a more generic electro technology type unit for that this group seems to think sits in ESI okay as well. So yeah, but we're definitely having a look at any of those imported units if there's an option to replace it. If the new version that's been developed in the UEE fits, like the DC we think does, so do we need another DC unit developed specifically for UET? The thought was probably no, but the tools unit or the workshop type unit was definitely an area that the group thought, and the potential development through this project, and then add it to qualifications as they get updated, like your underground and your overhead stuff is really
even
good.
Through to the advanced diploma, yeah.
Yeah, correct, Joe.
Yeah, no, Brad, I'm excited about that. Really looking forward to seeing it.
Yep. And also with this one, we discussed it, and we're going to take it's actually an agenda item for our meeting with this group on Monday, but happy to share it here. Any of the UET units in this qual that are common to other quals, we want to redevelop at this stage. Obviously, they won't change in the quals till those quals are reviewed. So say that the underground qualification, but we're looking at, outside of this tech committee, we're looking at probably putting up a specialist group that will look at those because they will be used. There's no point developing for this, and then we get to a review of the overhead and the underground quals, etc., and go, well, hang on, those units aren't suitable for this if they're already sitting in it. So we'll definitely be setting up a bit of a subgroup to do with this, looking at the future UET qualifications that will come under review that have common units with this one. So
looking forward to helping. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Joe, you got some
and
more on this one?
Yeah, I was just going to, without relying on my memory, which is not good, the piece of work that we were talking through as well about, those enablement type units of how we would build a pathway so they didn't need to be in the Cert 3, using that conversation. Where did we get to with that?
So enablement, might need
so the things to like the
mobility units and some of the safety units and the licensing and things, preparing people. I think we spent quite a bit of time talking about where they could sit so that they didn't have to form a large body of the quoll. Did that go any further?
Still a work in progress, but
still, yeah.
And probably in that, probably ends up in that.
Cert 2, wasn't it? Is that right?
No, so, or not the, you're talking about the mobility, like the rescue from a live panel, etc.
I felt like in one of the meetings we talked about some of those units that were really key, not just mobility. We talked about what are those things that are key to people being able to actually do work quickly and a mechanism to get those covered in the early stages. Maybe I'm confusing the conversation.
Yeah, I think we'll probably need it, yeah. But just on the Cert 2 to the Cert 3, we're also looking at, so looking at making that a UET qualification that would lead into this one, this Cert 3.
That's where I think it was.
There.
Yeah.
And also other UET Cert 3s like the line worker quals, but really making those units at Cert 2 level. So at the moment, and it's the same in UEE, there's a lot of units that carry over and they get credits into Cert 3. They do it at Cert 2 level. So we're looking at developing Cert 2 units that are really the underpinning knowledge that would allow someone then to move into a Cert 3, but not necessarily give them direct credits into a Cert 3 is the approach we're trying to take there. So I think, is that where you were going with that, Jo?
Yeah, I just couldn't remember the whole conversation, but I knew we had some good thinking about that sort of a pathway. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a very similar approach to what we're taking in the UEE with the Career Start and the electronics Cert 2, is it should be, you're learning the basis of what you're going to need to know in the Cert 3, but you're not getting a direct credit into those units. You're getting the underpinning knowledge that's going to help you enter those units, which is the whole idea of progression from AQF 2 to 3. And then if you pick up a trade qualification in the at Cert 3 level, you've got that underpinning knowledge to move forward, hopefully as a good student. So any questions?
Particularly in the pathway for the pathways for Indigenous First Nations learners, some of that we were seeing that helping with there. Is that right? That was
correct, particularly in both these quals, because predominantly those remote and very remote communities, we are talking about our First Nations. So, and getting people trained up in those areas so they don't have to rely on tradespeople being flown in from long distances, lots of flights, wet season, etc., access issues. So, any questions around this project? And again, there's a QR code there that'll take you to the project page for that, and also on that project page links to provide any feedback or questions around that. But happy to field any questions now before we move on, if there is any. All good. We'll flick to the next one, Rach. So just wanted to talk about our project submissions. So the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations, so we'll call them DEWA from now on. That is where our funding comes from. So we need to put in submissions for future projects, and then they go through the department, DEWA assess them, and then decide whether they're going to fund them or not. So as recently as last week, we just did some submissions, which included UET and UEP at this stage. We're holding back UEG a bit, but this group is interested in UET and UEP. So we've put a submission in to have a look at a full review, similar to what we're doing with UEE, of both of those training packages, UET and UEP. And this will lead into, because we're pretty much the rest of the meeting, we're going to open up for some general discussion. But around that, what does this group see, and start thinking about what you'd like to see in regards to that review, the structure of the qualifications. We've talked a little bit in that previous slide about, Cert 2s being a genuine pathway into Cert 3s. So I think that development of that UET Cert 2 is a positive, rather than necessarily doing the electrotechnology career start. There's potential to do that UET as a sort of career pathway into the Cert 3 qualifications. And certainly I'm not sure how many people online we've got today UEP, but we don't want to lose focus of the UEP, and so we've put in a submission for that training package as well. Not heavily used in qualifications, seems to be at the moment some units that cherry picked out, particularly around HV switching, etc. So there's definitely some work to do in that space, and we want to be talking to as many stakeholders as possible, assuming that these projects get funded, about what we can do in that qualification, especially around UEP, where you're talking generation, and with all the different forms of generation that are coming in with renewable energy, where does that sit in relation to the UEP training package? What can be incorporated into that? So yeah, hopefully if we receive funding for those projects, they will start. If we receive agreement on funding, it would be sometime around June, but it'll be very much along the lines of how we started the UEE project, because we're in full development of that at the moment. We'd be doing initial sort of workforce scanning around the transmission and generation sectors before we actually jump into training products as such. So there'd probably be about a 6-month window from June of some real initial desktop analysis, getting out, talking to stakeholders, etc., before we start looking at a tech committee, whether we have subject matter expert groups in that or just some smaller working groups. So sort of around start of 2027 for actual getting into the training products, because by then we'll be well advanced with our UEE. So anything that needs to be imported, because you don't want to be deciding on whether you want to import something if you don't have a proper draft of what you're actually going to be importing in to be looked at. So that probably leads us in to open discussion, which we're going to have plenty of time for, which is great. I'm going to hand over to Pete to sort of lead us off around the thinking here. Michael first before we go to Pete. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, you could have went, mate, doesn't matter. I was just picking up on your comment about UEP and the switching units that seem to be commonly used. I've just had a bit of a look at that in Queensland prior, and it was based on Construction Skills Queensland funding for people to access training at a reduced cost. And I identified the reason why they were picking that UEP units is to do with the prereq stuff in it compared to something out of, say, the UET package or something like that. So that was one thing I noticed just with UEP anyway, around why some of those units were identified, I think, as it was easy to access, easy to deliver as a standalone versus having all this other stuff in behind it. So
yeah, and there has been concern raised around those units, Michael, with they don't have prereqs at all, basically, for high voltage switching units, which is quite interesting. So yeah, that'll be on the radar.
All right. So just as you can see with the thought bubbles on the page and that, like, how do we keep the UEP and UET relevant, as in the training package material themselves? Imported core units, with UEE reviewing them and that, where Brett spoke before, we'd have to have a look at the units to see if they are still suitable for UET, UEP, or whether we need to create a UET, UEP version of those to suit the industry better. Consolidation of qualifications, as Brett spoke about in the UEE, where they have gone down looking at one qual with specializations. Is that something that could be looked at between the UEP or UET, between like a line worker qual, and just have the specialization of the different line workers? Changes to elective choices. Is there anything out there that companies would like to see in the elective banks of the units to open up variety for each of the qualifications? And are there any prerequisite requirements creating barriers? There is some that you look at a specific unit out of the UEE that does come over, but then you realise there's another 3 or 4 prereqs to that unit that you then got to go back and have a look at and gain as well to be able to get that unit coming across. So they're just thoughts in around to get people to look at starting to think about where things may need to be looked at with the UET and really open up some discussion in around that. And because nothing will start until they get the funding for the review, but it's more to get people's minds in sync now to where we could head with these qualifications and the units. So probably, and with the discussions, UET usually always gets first going and it can bog a meeting down a little bit. So we're going to open it up to UEP and anyone from that's on here in around the UEP training package that wants to put anything up at this stage of thoughts in around where the quals and that could be looked at and the units.
Hi, Richard Harvey from Fairwind, and just wanted to put on the agenda, and I'm trying to make a note of it online, that I'm very keen to have some time spent on reviewing the Cert 4 in wind power generation. And this is driven partly by the qual still being not quite fit for purpose, and partly by the fact that the wind industry is getting a much stronger push in recent times, and the Delburn wind farm in Victoria being a very clear example of major project skills guarantee requirements, which provide a really good opportunity for the Cert 4 in wind to become a qualification that is used by the industry to fulfil those requirements. And I think that there's also much more action in the industry around bringing apprentices in, and this qualification would also be useful there to give a pathway, perhaps to go from the Cert 3 through to the Cert 4. So I'd be very keen to kick off a process as much as possible in terms of reviewing that wind qual.
Yep.
Great to have you on board, Richard.
Matthew?
You can go Richard first.
Oh, sorry, I had you up as one there. You're right, Matt. No.
No, all good. I was just going to ask, I've been looking into a little bit in regards to decentralization of where power generation is going to go with the BESS and everything to do with CER and DER staff. How's all that going to start playing in effect with power plant generator workers, the workforce within those old school, your typical coal, gas power plants, and how that's going to potentially impact the workforce, given that a lot of our generation hopefully soon will come from a decentralized area compared to one that's centralized with just the power plants through coal and gas.
Richard, will you hand up responding to that one, or?
No, separate.
Something.
Yeah, sorry, there was something I forgot to raise on it. So
yeah.
No.
That to me, mate, that's one that needs to be looked at with this, because the generation has been pretty specific in the time that it has been a package, and to me that would have to be looked at and looked as well through the regulators and that of each state.
Yeah, because it's going to be interesting given that your domestic will start generating electricity for the grid, and where do we sit those people? It's mostly just going to be someone behind the desk with VPPs potentially doing that stuff, and it might completely shift our whole entire workforce in this field.
Yeah, it's a great point, Matt. And just for those of you who don't know, like this today's primarily focused on training package development stuff, but PSO is the Jobs and Skills Council for the energy sector. Part of our other remit is looking into workforce planning, and currently working on, which we will have at the end of this presentation, there's a bit of a survey from our industry engagement team who are working on this year's workforce plan, for people to answer some questions on. We put it at the back end because it'll take a bit of time, so we just wanted to give you the link to it at the end of the presentation. But there's certainly some questions, around that, the mobility of the workforce, etc., and people moving into different areas. And as you talk about, Matt, with that decentralisation of generation happening now and into the future even more. So yeah, good points to raise. And some of it is there will be some relationship back to the training products, because at the moment there's some training products that are very specifically, as Peter said, relating to coal-fired power plants, etc. So yeah, that's certainly will be part of that project as far as what we need in the units of competency / qualification space. And great to have you on board, Richard. Haven't seen you for a while, so and you'll be definitely one of our go-tos in that Cert 4 or any wind power generation qual that we might end up with, whether it's Cert 4 or do we want an entry one as well, or they're the sort of things we want to really. This session's to really start spitballing, for want of a better term, about what you want in your industries, get people thinking about what changes, because in both these training packages, the same with the UEE, there's been a lot of rinse and repeat over probably the last 20 years when they've been redeveloped. We've just basically, not we, but the industry or the developers have cut and paste, moved stuff across, done some minor updates. And we're definitely taking a new thinking on that in the UEE project. And with these ones, assuming they get approved, in the review of both these training packages, that'll be the same process we go through, which is why we want to do this, sort of start talking about it now. And even if it gets approved, spend the first few months of that time really doing some deep dive analysis before we jump straight into going quals and units of competency, because what we found with the UAE, once you stand up those SME groups or tech committees, everyone wants to just talk about the units of competency and what already exists and etc. without. So we wanted to go to those groups with a broader focus of, this is what we found. And, that consolidation of quals was definitely one that we started with early.
Did you have another one? Yeah.
Yeah. If I could, no, I'll happily, take that on board. I think the other issue with the wind quals has also just been the difficulty in engaging with industry, and the fact that a lot of times we've just had to be, the tags have resulted in kind of interested amateurs rather than actually industry people for the most part. But I'm very happy to be going back to square one with this. Is the Cert 4 the right vehicle? Is there a good entry level qual? Because the other thing that I really want to put on the table, I guess, but if there's going to be a process we'd have to talk through, is in the absence of good local qualifications, is really the wide take up by the industry of the Global Wind Organisation training standards that are really being used as pre-start training for a lot of roles in the wind industry now, and the RTOs out there have kind of picked off, these units of competency kind of generally line up and for just the safety units, but we really have to work out if we're going to bring the wind industry into the national training system more so than essentially first aid, CPR, working at heights. we have to, really engage with the Global Wind Organisation standards and line up quals wherever we can. That was the only other thing I wanted to say.
Definitely agree with that, Richard. And it's been highlighted a bit, and the thing about RDOs going, oh, this matches the GWO, and then, but it's like, does it actually? So that certainly would be part of any project around that space.
Yeah.
Sarah?
Sarah, yeah.
Hi, Brett. Hi, team. In support of what Richard said there, I remember in the previous IRC, which I know Peter, Richard, and myself, and I think you might have been in there as well, Brett. I can't remember that was discussed, that global wind training, and right at the end of that IRC process, there was a item on the table about that, about looking at developing the unit's competency in line with GWO training, because when we had looked at it individually, each of us had sort of mapped little bits of it. We noticed and observed that there was numerous different units of competency being adopted and being sold as packages by different training organisations, and some of them even included some TAFEs, packaging it up as GWO training, which it's not, but some of it was mapped somewhat to the GWO basic training and things like that. So it's certainly something that we'd like to see on the table for further conversation as well.
Yeah. And yeah, Peter was definitely in that IRC. I wasn't for this group. But yeah, we did get that in the handover from notes from ASI that was raised. And it's certainly been raised, particularly around like what you said, Sarah, with RDOs packaging up and actually calling it global wind training, but they're developing units and they don't totally align, as you mentioned. So that would be certainly at the forefront of any of those safety units to try and for the wind industry to try to get them to align to that GWO standard units, for want of a better word. I don't think they call them units, but yeah, get our Australian units of competency, and so they definitely map directly to that training.
So any further comments or thoughts in around the UEP? Okay, if not, happy to look at with the UET.
Actually, can I raise? Sorry, I really didn't think this through before we started, and maybe this is just an answer you can provide me. In the wind industry, it is large-scale wind. We're seeing more and more essentially projects being built as wind and batteries. Can you just give me an idea, kind of what the thinking is on industrial scale battery construction? Is that kind of, are there units of competency there? Are they being built into UEE? Or has this been considered very much?
It certainly has been considered. At the moment in the UEE, the battery units are pretty generic to your sort of solar system domestic type grid connect, meeting the requirements of so you get your accreditation to be able to do that install work. So they're certainly, and I think Jo can probably speak to this because she's raised it a couple of times before about that more large scale, and even in the solar generation, there's nothing really around the large scale, but certainly not around large scale batteries. Did you want to take up on that one, Jo?
So we are obviously not the technical person to talk in too much detail, but we see some alignment to the large scale BESS stuff in the substation space, in the Cert 4 substation space. And definitely a need, so one step up from that domestic industrial, there's definitely a gap when you're talking about large scale environments. So something that we've been thinking about, both connected to generation quals, and also we do see some sort of tie-in. We sort of see a substation qualified person, experienced substation worker with some gen sort of capability, and then the BESS, the large scale BESS, being a really good sort of renewable worker in that large scale space. So we do see a linkage there as well. But yeah, many more clever people than me to get in, but that's just them. So we do see a need for it, or an alignment for it in those two streams.
And we do think it probably belongs in these two training packages more than the UEE is going to be more around that.
For large scale, for sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
The smaller scale. And there's also a bit of, which you might be able to speak to, Michael, because I don't have Christina here. I know she's involved with the Queensland, what you're doing with the Clean Energy Batteries Centre of Excellence. If Christina was here, I would have dropped her in it. But did you want to speak to what's going on up there?
Yeah, well, as most people know, the tapes all around the country, they've got the centres of excellence in the respective areas. The one in Queensland that's running at the moment is around clean energy batteries, and it is aimed at the larger utility style stuff. And it's about developing a pathway from, being a licensed mechanic, and then go in those higher skills that might breach over into higher education and engineering skills to give a pathway up to the higher qualifications are required to do the work on this site. So the intent, essentially, in simple words, is you've got an engineer that might be needed for this, and then you need a mechanic to do the on-the-ground work. How do you combine those two so you got one person that can do the whole lot, and then there's an upskill pathway to meet the need for that transition to clean energy? So that's occurring at the moment. So there's a number of committees in that Centre of Excellence, one including the higher level pathways about how to progress someone to have through from a Cert 3 right through to having a Cert, the vocational, higher vocational skills that we need to do the work. So it's probably a brief overview.
Thanks, mate.
All right. So from a UTE perspective, it's probably just a question and thoughts of people I wanted to throw out there, because in the last review of the package was the diploma level was removed totally from the UET package, and the advanced diploma was just left. Has that caused any issues out in the industry that we may have to look back at that again? Because at the time when it was discussed, majority were using the UEE at the diploma level. So yeah, that was sort of one I was just going to ask out there. So Ryan, yeah, or the
Ryan, you with us?
Right.
Yeah, I'm here. 1 second, I've got issues with my.
That's all right. And just while we're waiting for
Here we go.
Ryan.
Yeah, there we go. I'm just with Joe. I'm in we couldn't get on the big screen. So we do the advanced diploma here in Victoria.
Yep.
The removal of the diploma has had no effect. We feel that the advanced diploma has worked well for us in industry. So when I'm talking about the advanced diploma, that's in design and the tester, testing and protection. So to your response there, Peter, there was no issue removing it. It's been,
and that was the general discussion, like when we did the last review as well, in around that.
Yeah.
And I think for once again, that's another example of a qualification where the consolidation has been quite useful, because you've got the common pathway that applies to everybody at that level. And then there's some efficiency in delivery with that as well. And then you can move into your tester stream, your design stream, your systems stream, your transmission. So it offers quite a few options for people.
Yeah, which the Cert 4 in power systems, other than the
same.
substation, is the same as well.
Yeah.
And how do you, Ryan's, because you're putting people through that, how are you finding that diploma in its current form?
Yeah, so we were originally using a provider, or we still are kind of using them in WA. It was done online. We've actually engaged with Oricon to deliver the face-to-face delivery here in Victoria. The face-to-face delivery model it's worked out well for us. This is sort of like for us here in Victoria, things have changed dramatically in the last, say, 3 to 4 years. So the way it's going to enhance over time, I feel that we're heading in the right direction.
Yep. And do you think there's any gaps or
No, I don't think there's any gaps at this point, mate. Nothing that's been highlighted to us.
Yep. Yeah, I have had a little bit of a look at that one, and it's pretty well structured diploma actually, because we found in the UEE, because there's multiple diplomas in there and advanced diplomas, but some of them weren't really. They were full of Cert 3 units, and they weren't really aimed at that paraprofessional level, what you're thinking a diploma should be, around that design and
that one, Brett. So the only probably which I think will naturally get resolved in the review is, or should that get funded, is 19, that old chestnut. So the prerequisite catch, all of a sudden you've got nearly engineers or technicians having to go do some fabrication to meet a prerequisite change. So that is the one thing that we'd call out. Probably, like a drafter or a designer, do they need to know fabrication? Who knows?
Yeah, and that's certainly should be addressed under that UEE project. Some of the prerequisites are definitely being more defined, and if you follow the TPOF, the current prerequisite chains in probably these quals as well don't actually meet TPOF requirements, because they've been put in more for, particularly the UEE ones, for delivery sequence, which you can't do. It's got to be the underpinning knowledge from that unit's going to lead to a competent outcome in the unit that it's listed as a prereq for. So that unit shouldn't appear in any prereq chains, I would imagine, Joe, at this stage. That's definitely not on the radar. So yeah, because very interesting that we've got advanced diploma people going into a workshop and bending and drilling, etc. But purely put in there because of that pre-reg issue. So
So just one thought. I know with you reviewing the UEE, what happens to, say, a UET unit that's sitting over there? I'll use an example. The battery unit out of the substation qual is an elective in the Cert 3 electro qual. So you, in the same way you were talking about your remote, we can't align the two reviews up together. So the UEE would go through with the current battery unit and then get updated, because it's only an elective, it's not a core.
Yeah, it would, Pete, because you can't update, obviously, from a different training package under, you can't update an imported unit. It'd be just whether that unit was still going to stay in there would be the question.
Well, that's another question.
Yeah. But the one saving thing is, if they are electives, they can be updated in what we call a minor change, which doesn't need all that process. So if the UET package got released, that unit was updated through a minor change process, which doesn't involve a tech committee, etc., because it's already been endorsed in the product it's in, and it's only an elective. We can update it through that process. It's still not ideal. You'd prefer, the most current unit if there's one on the radar, but it'll depend on, these projects getting up and how much we can align them with the UEE release. But also that's it is that consideration, and that's that thought bubble on the screen there about imported core units, because that's where you really do run into the problem of, if they've been updated in the training package you've imported them from, that requires a full endorsement process to change those units if they're listed as a core in any qualification.
Okay.
So definitely where we're we're looking at importing units, we need to be sure that there's not something we could use or a better option. And I think that's the prime example, which Tom brought up before, is that what's currently CD51, that drawings type unit that just got imported because it was there, but was it ever actually fit for the UET training package? It's debatable when it had stuff around being a construction electrician, basically. There's some of that stuff in there that directly relates. And it's also been imported into a heap of, it's also in a heap of UEE coils that it wasn't really fit for either. So that one's been addressed, and hopefully it can actually be still used as an imported unit, but that'd be decided at the time. But definitely the tools example, or the assemble disassemble unit, whatever it's called at the moment, is a good one. That why aren't we teaching or training in what a electricity supply industry worker would be doing, a line worker in those quals specifically, and the type of basic tool knowledge and workshop sort of practices that they're doing, rather than going, oh, there's already one in UAE, let's import that. So that certainly is high on the radar for both of these quals when we look at those imported units, particularly into the core.
Definitely, with the reduction in fabrication we're required to do on a daily basis, Brett.
Yeah.
Those two are high priority for me to look at.
Yep.
In terms of our internal stuff as well.
Yeah, and what's the stuff they're missing out on that could be in there?
Yeah.
You're doing stuff that, yeah.
Probably off topic, but I don't know, schematics and understanding the outcomes of switching networks and stuff for a distributor. For me, in that drawings and diagrams space probably sits as a higher priority than some of what's in there currently. So just a bit of food for thought, mate.
Yeah, and that could be the case, that even though we've made that a more generic unit, when we get to this review, it might be like, well, it's still all right, but we could have a better one to suit this space. So we're certainly open to options. I think in the past there's been a bit of that, and there is, the TPOF does talk about you shouldn't be duplicating content, but if the argument's there that they're two different industries, you're not duplicating content, even though the units may look similar from afar, the content in them is going to be specific to the industry that it's aimed at. So we're certainly open to developing new if it's going to make the end training product better.
Okay, any other comments?
Did you want to just raise around the consolidation? And Joe, did you want to speak to that around like the line worker quals and get people's thoughts?
Absolutely. So I don't know, our experience with, as Pete talked about, and I'm sure there's going to be pros and cons both ways, but just out there. So the advanced diploma as like what the core is there, and then with the offerings of the streams, and then also the experience with Cert 4 network systems, and then the streaming, live line switching, whatever, specialized cable coming out of that, from that one qual, then going very specific. Just some of that makes me go, and once again, not probably the most technical person to be understanding all of this, but because so much of it is, the Common Core is so similar between 4 of the qualifications. Is there a Cert 3 ESI, whatever, or worker sort of qualification that has a transmission specialisation, an underground specialisation, an overhead specialisation, and a rail traction specialisation, that all still have the same trade? So not changing anything else, but from a delivery efficiency point of view, and also from I guess from an industry point of view, what is the stuff that we can train a lot of people in, for efficiency in the workplace as well, and then move into specializations and really target. And some of me back to what we were just talking about, like why are we teaching people that what we perhaps don't need to teach them anymore? But that streaming would enable some really targeted, this is what this is the fundamentals of what everybody needs to know, but this is right now in this day what a transmission worker needs to know. This is what a lines person overhead is doing every day now, and this is how we make that stream really current and specific. So I don't know, I've just got some thoughts about, I like that model of consolidated qualifications where it's aligned. Seems to make sense, particularly in our training packages, the way of where the similarities are.
Sarah?
Yeah, I understand what you mean by trying to align those things, Joe. However, they're fundamentally different trades and have different and different licenses attached to them. So we just need to be very, very careful how that might look or be put together. It's would be there's definitely some common parts of it, but that's probably something that could be looked at as we move into the review of these training packages.
So one quick one with that then, Brad, has anything been picked up with the UEE one where you're looking at consolidating that were linked to, say, apprenticeships that could bring in that sort of side in around the apprenticeship schemes?
At this point, no, because we've mainly focused on the Cert 2 and then the diplomas consolidation, but we are looking at, but we're in the early days of that. We sort of wanted to get a draft together to get out first around the electrical fitter. So that would be really one that there is that distinct pathway. Having a common qualification that would include the streams of electrical fitter and machine repair and switch gear, I think is the other qual. So there's currently 3 quals across those at the moment. Switch gear and machine repair, very small enrolments. So it's more about making that essentially an elect fitter qual, but with those other streams as options, as elect fitter as one stream, and then having machine repair and switch gear streams. So that will be a good test case for that one, because we'll definitely be talking to the regulators, and same in this space, it'd have to be worked out with the regulators that they would accept a specialisation rather than a qual saying that's definitive that you're overhead distribution. If it was an ESI worker with a specialisation of overhead distribution. They do similar in plumbing, so it's not that it can't be done, but we definitely, it would be a conversation to be having with the regulators for sure. But yes, UEE, we're only in the early days of the cert, because the cert 3 is really the space where it's a concern. All the others is more, diploma level or cert 2. Cert 2, you're doing the basics. Diploma's that more advanced, so it's at that trade cert 3 level that that consideration certainly comes in. But yeah, it's good points there, and certainly something that we will be addressing along the way. But
okay, Mike.
Just in the sorry, Mike. Sorry, there's 2
Mike.
Mike. You go.
Oh, there is 2. Sorry, Mike. Mike Millard-Hurst. Sorry.
All right, I'll go then. No, look, just to echo some of the stuff that's already been said, but I suppose what we're seeing in particular is the current qualifications in tables to a degree, but certainly in lines, is they're not really fit for us anymore. Like we don't need some of what's in it, but we need things that are not in it. And like Brett was just saying, like, we're crossing boundaries now that in the industry that we never really crossed before. So, we back in the day, I was trained as a linie, but you're just a glorified fence erector with big poles. But now it's more, it's technology, it's automation, it's renewable. There's a whole new raft of things that we need our people. It's almost like we need it's about skill sets, right? We need a clone that understands electricity and how it works, but then we plug in various skill sets. You know, you might need a little bit of overhead and a bit of renewable, or a bit of overhead and underground, or a bit of, or it's a whole different thing now. And I think, yeah, amalgamating some of the quad or some of the units or packages would be advantageous. More flexibility in how you get to your endpoint through skill sets would be useful, I think, because it's just a different world now. We don't need line workers and cable joiners. We need something different. That's the feel we get anyway from what we're doing, because obviously we're renewed in, you know, all the battery, the BESSes, the SPSs, all the microgrids. We've got all that different stuff going on. Yeah, that's what we're seeing a bit.
Yeah. And that was the idea of starting discussions today, to get people to start thinking and get their heads around where they might want to bring to the table if the submission does get up. So, Michael, this time.
You're just on the back of Sarah's stuff. I mean, they are distinct trades. Your licensing mapping project might give you some good insights to where things might be able to be aligned. So, you know, picking up on the line worker qual, you know, Queensland has 3 restrictions, but under the legislation, it's just a license for a line worker. So, depending on the qual we get, would depend on the restriction that's placed on the license. However, you know, you may be able to, you know, put a submission in to the regulator around, well, why don't we have one qual for line workers with the customisation depending on your electives, and then potentially, you know, there's just a line worker licence, and the PCBU will then start to determine the competence depending on the task being undertaken, which is not dissimilar to the jointing qual. There, you know, with that introduction of that extra unit being rubber, you know, we've got to make a decision on what we need to do for licensing, whether we add another restriction in, whether we remove all restrictions, just say you're a jointer, because the legislation just says a jointer can do X. So there may be things you can look at to streamline and the packages maybe, but I'm not sure whether you'll get one generic or one across the disciplines that, yeah, you can deliver. But yeah, there are certainly, I think, some efficiencies that might be able to be gained.
Yep. Sarah?
Yeah, just further to what Michael just said and the speaker before, they are very, very big questions there about aligning it in that way, and that will require significant input from all of, I know from the ETU perspective, from all of our state branches, because of the difference in licensing legislation across the jurisdictions, which I know PSO have done a mapping project with regards to that. So that's definitely certainly going to be something that would be need to be discussed. But you also need buy-in from industry, and I can't, you know, tell you that I can stand in a workplace meeting in front of 200 lineys and they're going to be happy with that idea. So we need to be very careful how we're discussing this.
Yeah.
And make sure that we're not stepping outside of what we should be discussing from a training package perspective.
And that was the idea of just mentioning it. It might not go to any outcome from it, but it was just to put it out there to say.
Oh yeah, I get that. I get that, Woodsy, and I know what your feelings personally probably are on that. However, it's something that, you know, if those sort of little rumours creep out into the industry, it can cause all sorts of problems out on site, and that can lead to industrial problems, which is what we would certainly be trying to avoid. So if there is a discussion heading that way, that would definitely need to involve the ETU's leadership to, before myself or Matt, who's also in this meeting or any other technical meeting, would be able to make further comment on a view that we might hold apart from our current view on that.
Yep.
Yeah, and it certainly was, Sarah, just a thought bubble process around what do people think and what are the issues, the hurdles, etc.
I understand. I'm just
So
saying
it's certainly not saying this is what we're going to do.
Absolutely understand, Brett. I'm just saying that's a very, very big topic to take on. So it's very clear. I can't make it any more clear how the ETU would need to tackle a conversation like that if it was something that was going to progress, and I can't see it getting too far with our members.
Yeah, and we would, like I said, we'd certainly be talking to all stakeholders, including unions, regulators, etc. When hopefully this project gets underway to review these products. And that's that I mentioned earlier on around that first sort of 6 months of the project when it commences, around that deep dive into all those sort of things that, is it just, the similarities between overhead distribution and underground? Is that something we could look at? Does it have to be across all four, etc.? But it's really about getting the products right for what industry wants, and what the outcomes for, the students at the end of it. So, yeah, all those things to be considered without a doubt.
Any further comments?
Just that flexibility in pathway, as mentioned earlier, would be a good outcome in that space.
Yep.
And I did like Mike's. I've never heard that one before, Mike, about a fencer with really big poles. I'll be able to use that to stir up lionies from now on. So.
Yeah, it doesn't go down well, just so you know.
I'm a bit offended over in the corner here.
I see Tom's eyes roll at that one.
There's always somebody offended, Pete. It's okay.
It was nationally accredited when I did it.
Yeah, it was when I did it, but it didn't stop the rumours.
So what about on this slide? We've got about, what are you seeing in industry, skills and knowledge gaps, those tech changes? We've already talked a bit about the best in that UEP space. New and emerging roles without accredited training attached. What's happening there? And who do we need to speak to as PSO? And would it be beneficial for sort of a survey to go out early on in this, assuming this project gets taken up? Jo?
One thing we hear a little bit about is what's the changing requirement with all the data centre work?
Yes, we do hear a lot about data centres.
Yeah. So what's, the skilling change there is that a change?
I think it's certainly on the radar and a couple of the JSCs, because if Future Skills, who look after a lot of that comms type units, and certainly with us, it gets raised a lot. But from my, and it may be slightly controversial, but my point of view is they're a climate controlled environment with good backup power. So is there a huge gap with data centers? They're probably simplifying it a little bit. Certainly in the comm space with what's going on inside there is, but as far as like when we're talking this group, your backup power supplies, on-site generators, etc. It's not new tech really. Nige?
Yeah, thanks, Brett. Really interesting point you raised there, Jo. Brett's already mentioned work going on across the JSCs. I'm a little bit involved in that, so I can probably speak a little bit more fulsomely about that to give people an idea. So there's 3 primary jobs and skills councils are involved. Build Skills, which is really about the construction side of data centres, so what the specifications are that they're building to. And then you've got Future Skills Organisation, which is very much about the kind of the IT side of things, and then ourselves with the range of things that we cover. There's crossovers. One of the things that we're doing at the moment is really taking it back and trying to identify the job roles and what are the skills related to the job roles, and are there new skills that are coming into the job roles that they're looking at in data centres. So we're trying to tag it back to the job role, and that's work that's going on at the moment. As everybody on this call will probably know, the Commonwealth about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, put out a statement of expectations for data centres, which has got skills quite front and centre in that suite of 5 expectations. So there is a lot of work and there's a lot of pressure coming from the Commonwealth for the Jobs and Skills Councils to be engaged in inputting and be actively involved in this agenda, and that's what it is that we're doing collaboratively at the moment.
Michael?
Yeah, Michael.
I think the thing that I'm sort of aware of in that space linked to the data center is more about the network security. So I've had conversations around that recently. Like someone was talking to me, I said, I don't regulate the security of a data center, but the conversation was more about if someone can get into a network, can they then control electricity networks, switches and stuff like that, and that disrupts power and can be quite disruptive. So that was sort of conversations I had around, which sort of links loosely to data centers, but it's about protecting their integrity. What do we do in our trades to prevent that? So good IT processes and stuff, which will come into potentially what our tradespersons are going to need to be mindful of when they start, when more, the technology grows more and more and more, and it's less hands-on operation to move a switch versus logging into a PC or something like that. So I don't know if that's a similar spin or something that maybe need to be considered.
Yeah, and just, I guess my comments were based around from a training perspective in UET UEP. Like there's definitely significant workplace challenges and job roles, etc. And that security issue, Michael's another big one. But where does that land for training gaps in UET UEP is what we probably need to be looking at. But there is a big broad conversation around data centers and particularly where they've been managed from and etc. So yeah, Matthew?
I was just going to firstly touch base back with Michael on that as well. It goes into the BESS, the best systems and all that stuff with the cyber security. But another one that's going to become emerging very shortly is heavy vehicles with VTG capabilities, them being able to interact with the grid. The cybersecurity risk of that could potentially knock out critical infrastructure, not only for electricity, but water, given that most of our pumping stations are connected to a grid. But also with that as well, in the training realm of it, we're looking at 240 kilowatt hour charging systems being implemented, but also that's only the vehicles of probably light vehicles. The heavy vehicles like buses, and all that type of stuff is now getting developed, and what the potential impacts that's going to have not only to the transmission sector but the transformers as well, and how they are capable of being able to withstand that type of pull from these charging systems. We might have to also look at upskilling, being able to identify whether transformers are going to be suitable in those areas and be able to withstand the capability demands of what these systems are going to be pulling soon.
Any more comments around that?
Yeah.
I did just have one question for the group, if I could steer abruptly back to line workers for a second. With the test and verify unit that we're using in the qualification, just wanted to ask how that is going for other distributors, whether they're sort of happy with its physical makeup at the moment, with the changes that renewables are sort of making on the network in terms of fault finding, and some nuances around when these faults are becoming evident, when they aren't, dependent on load, etc., etc. A lot of that's coming into the distribution space. Not much of it captured in criteria and units. Didn't know if that was a point for anyone or anyone had looked at that. Obviously, the unit was originally built for test and verify connections, which is pretty plain Jane, but power quality issues are going to develop and morph into different things for us.
Okay.
So that's around that skill gap, Tom, definitely. So
yeah,
that'll be good info when
tech.
we so probably from PSO perspective around that blue one up in the corner, do you think this group would it be beneficial and stuff like what Tom raised there could then, you know, be a response to in that survey, and then we've got that sort of background evidence to start working with. If we were to put out a survey with some general questions around these training packages to the group, is that something that people would see as benefit, and would you be happy to be involved in as that sort of first step in the process of reviewing these units? You know, we've got some other stuff that's happened in our journey and as PSO over the last 2.5 years that we know of identified problems like that no prereqs in the HV switching. But just wondering, throw it out there, the group, would people see this as something to benefit if we can get a bit of a survey out, and happy to have that shared with your cohorts as well, so we can get feedback from stakeholders from across both these training package sectors?
I think it could be. It's getting it out to the wider side. Like, you can only send it to who you've got contacts for and be up on your Facebook and your other way that you get your information out there. But it would take from your contact list you've got that have been involved in UET and UEP since PSO's conception that we do get out to more. We need to get it past those that have been involved.
Yeah, it's a good point, Pete. And Nigel, who just joined in before, I probably should do a proper introduction. He's our Director of Industry Engagement. So they would certainly be who we'd be relying on to work with this group, our existing stakeholders, and trying to reach a broader market as well as that, you know, particularly from an industry point of view. You know, if you're not involved in training, how much do you know about PSO? We've sort of found, and we're certainly broadening that scope now, but the bigger it can grow, the better, obviously.
It's a really good point, Peter. We've got a kind of responsibility from an engagement perspective to make sure it's broad in the non-TPOP stage, so not the 4-week kind of mandated consultation period, but at this end, making sure that we've got a really broad perspective on where industry's going in T&P. We understand where things are going from a world of work perspective, what's happening in job roles, where's crossovers, what's new technology that's coming in, where's the industry going from that point of view, to then make sure that we've got that really solid front end to what it is that we do. We can then come back and test with groups like this. But I think at the moment, making sure that we've got a really wide net so that we've got a broad kind of church of views on these issues is really important for us. Working with this group so that we tap into your networks is also another really important way of us doing it. So I think for us, it's multiple tools in the bag for this one to make sure that we do have that really solid front end.
Yep.
And just on that, like, and you know, one of the remits in the TPOF when you stand up a tech committee, one of the roles of that tech committee is to make sure that the correct stakeholders have been engaged with. So you rely on those tech committees to bring in their network, you know, to make sure that we're engaging with that. But this is very much an open forum, the technical advisory group and these meetings, but also happy to take on board from anyone in this group any gaps that they see where PSO might, you know, areas of your industry you think that may not be aware of PSO and what's going on, and particularly if we're going to start reviewing the training, that basically feeds into that industry. Who are the key players that you think, if you identify any gaps, happy to hear from you, either now or just drop us an email outside of this when, as you progress and you come across someone, happy to get introductions to, as you're going through your day-to-day work life and you're dealing with someone and thinking, oh, maybe, conversation of PSO might come up, they might not know about us, and you think that they'd be handy.
Yeah.
Happy to take any recommendations there rather than just pointing them at the website.
Yeah.
If you flick us an email at training@PSO, we'll make a direct contact with them then to get them on board for where we think they sit, within whichever meetings or updates or, technical groups, etc. Sarah?
Yeah, I think that making sure that we've got workers represented in the subject matter groups where possible as well is a voice that's missing in many of the spaces. I know it is really difficult to get people off the tools and in front of a computer to do these types of meetings, but it's certainly something that, as you know, Brett, the ETU has been quite vocal about making sure that recent learners and workers who are the end user of these training products that are being developed are involved more and as much as we can in the process as it goes along. And we'll certainly be making those efforts to get people into these groups where we can. However, it's not always an easy task to do that.
Look,
Yeah,
sorry
very Sarah.
sorry if I can just jump in there. Hi, my name's Ben Williams. I'm just recently appointed the RTA manager to Transgrid. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the invite to the forum. I'm enjoying the conversation so far. Look, I just put a question in the chat just before around, probably what would be the most beneficial forum to have a conversation about, like prerequisites and such like that for units of competencies that sort of seem to be identical but not represented in another training package. And I thought, is this the best forum to address that in, or is it sort of too low level for that? Is that those conversations, and is this the best forum, I suppose, to address those in?
It certainly can, Ben. If we're going to get too far in the weeds, it's probably further down the track when we're looking at the actual units. But happy for a high level if you've got some issues you want to raise here. That was the point of bringing this sort of open discussion to this one. And Rachel has just popped in the chat that training@poweringskills.com, which you can provide us direct feedback to us. But if it's something that you think you'd like some comment back from the group, certainly we've got a bit of time left in this meeting, so happy for you to raise some issues around prereqs if.
No, look, I won't go. Look, thank you. I won't go that far into the weeds. It was more about introductions and starting the conversation for myself. Thank you, and I'll take note and take the other pathway and get offline and do it that way. Thank you.
Yeah, and then that could be something that when we get that feedback back through the website or that email address is probably easiest for this group. That's something we can bring to the next tag, or when we get the project up and running to the SME groups or technical committee, whichever it may be. So we do log all that feedback that comes into us, and particularly around this, as we've sort of socialised that this is potentially the next 2 training packages that are going to be reviewed. We'll be looking forward to getting as much feedback as possible. So thanks, Ben. Good to have you on board.
Excellent. Thank you.
So is there any other, I guess we probably just open discussion while we've still got some time. There is a couple of little survey links we'll cover before the end, but is there any more open discussion we want to have about anything that's been discussed today, or anything to do with training in UEP, UET space that people want to raise? We might just pop up the sentiment feedback, Rach, while we're talking. So if you could just, if you wouldn't mind just scanning the code, if you've got your phone handy, I'm sure Rachel will probably pop a link into the chat shortly. It's a really short survey just about what you thought of this process. But happy to talk on while people are doing that, if anyone's got anything they want to raise before we look at rounding out the meeting. Nothing more from Joe or Peter as the chairs?
No, I think
today?
it's been good conversation for today, just to start some discussion in around it, so people can start getting those thoughts if you do get over the line for the review.
Yep, thanks, Pete, and thanks for your input today, chairing. Joe, before we round out.
And that's like, you know, there's no doubt review of training package is a very, very big job with lots of ramifications, things to consider. So all of that pre-thinking to get the best for all stakeholders through the process is really, really important. Yeah. So something that's relevant and works. So it's really good to be starting the conversation with as many, you know, interested and relevant parties as possible.
Thanks, and thanks, Joe. Rach, did you just want to put up the workforce and skills survey? So this one is something that you probably want to take offline. And can I throw you under the bus, Nigel? Did you want to speak to this?
I'm actually happy to speak to it, Brett.
Oh, Lyndall? Yep, great.
Yeah.
So yeah. Lyndall's also from our industry engagement team. So thanks, Lyndall.
Yeah, so this is PSO's 2026 Energy Workforce and Skills Survey. It's a really important survey for PSO and for the research and policy team. The insights that we gather from this survey feed into our workforce plan, but it's really not just about the workforce plan, it's about PSO's activities, it's about our projects, it informs training, product design, research, advocacy, and the advice that we give to government. So we've had a really good response so far. It's been open for a couple of weeks and you should have already received an email from us, although it might have also ended up in your junk. But it's only open until the 22nd of April. So we're doing a really big push in the final days. Be really, really grateful if you yourselves could complete the survey. So that's the ask, but also share within your network, share within your organisations. We need that amplifying effect. So if you've got an all staff email, please send it out to everyone. You can put it in your social media posts as well. So, you know, in terms of who we want to hear from, it's basically everyone. It's employers, supervisors and workers, as we were talking about before. Educators, trainers, assessors, apprentices, anyone studying an energy qualification, unions, industry associations, peak bodies, government, research organisations, everyone. The more perspectives that we get, the stronger the evidence base that we'll have. So this is my really impassioned plea. Please take the time to complete this. It's a really important survey for PSO. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Lyndall. You did that so much better than I would have. And also that is, if people for some reason miss the link or the QR code, that is available through the website. Lyndall, they'd find that easy enough.
Yeah, as soon as you log into the website at the moment, a little prompt comes up straight away and you can go straight in there. So you can direct people just to the PSO website if that's easier for you as well.
And it comes up as that pop-up box. Yep.
Yep.
Great. Thank you, Lyndall. So our next meeting of this group tag is scheduled for Thursday, the 20th of August. So hopefully, or most definitely by then, we will have news and we'll probably have socialised it prior to that about those submissions and whether they are successful for the review of these two training packages. So I just want to thank everyone for their input today. I think there was some really great discussion, great starting point, hopefully to lead into those projects. As I mentioned just before, if you've got anything you want to reach out directly to us with, there is some, you can go through the website and there's a case for change button in there, but happy for you to email training at Preparing Skills Direct as well. Rachel, who has been running the slide deck, monitors those and sends them out to the relevant person in the organisation to deal with and respond to, and they get logged in the background, you know, for our evidence gathering as well. So unless there's anything else, we might finish up a little bit earlier than the 2 hours, but I think it's been some really good conversation. Good to get this group back together, some new faces, which is fantastic as well. And happy for you to share. This is pretty much an open forum, so anyone in the industry that you think could benefit from coming along to these tags for the UET UEP, we're happy to organise invites for them if get them registered. So unless there's anything else, I just thanks again to Joe and Peter for giving us their time outside of their normal J jobs.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, thanks for that. It's been good.
Great. Well, we might round it up. Everyone have a good rest of your day and rest of your week.